Welcome back. As we step into this four-part process, let's get ourselves thinking about a particular student that you could apply this process to. Take a moment. Think of a student, someone that may have always struggled with some task or another, or perhaps a student that never struggled until we moved to online learning, or maybe a student that seemed to get by with online learning, but then all of a sudden dropped off the face of the earth and stopped engaging. Do you have someone in mind? Good. Now, step one in the four-part problem-solving process to consider and remove barriers is to identify the barrier. So let's think of that student and move through this process. Step one, identify the barrier, is what I call the trigger. Something triggers in your mind that, that feeling that something is awry. Most likely you've already done this part. If not, you've already done this part about the student you're thinking about. If not, let's think further about how you might identify the barrier. First, consider what tasks the learner needs to accomplish to complete the learning. Now, this might look different. We're potentially learning in multiple environments. We need to consider the task in each environment separately. What tasks do the learner struggle with in brick and mortar learning? In asynchronous learning? What about in synchronous learning? They are different, or they could be different. Next, let's consider what area of concern these tasks are demonstrating. For example, is it an academic performance issue? Perhaps a foundational skill that hasn't been learned, like decoding or certain foundational math skills? Is it a communication barrier, like a stuttering difficulty that presents itself big time when learning online in a synchronous format? Could it be a cognitive difference, the way the learner recalls and applies knowledge and reasoning? Is there a physical barrier? Struggling to sit all day instead of walking from room to room in the hallways, we're sitting all day long. Is it a sensory barrier? Is the student staring at the computer screen all day long? What about a social emotional barrier? Is the student struggling to regulate their emotion on Zoom meetings? Or maybe, just maybe, it's a technology skill barrier. They can't log into their device. Their navigation on their home device is different than their school device. What area is the task barrier presenting itself in? Once we know what the barrier is and categorize it, we can then begin to think critically about when that barrier arises and how to potentially address it. Something to consider, though. As we continue to plan for individual learner here in this module, think if that barrier might exist for other learners as well. I bet it does, or it could. As we begin to identify ways to reduce or remove that barrier for this particular student you're thinking about, you could also be thinking, could I embed this strategy or tool in the way that I plan for the rest of my students? Now, let's move forward. Use the Planning for Learner Success problem-solving guide linked below to document the learner that you have in mind. And let's get ready to move on to key concept number 2, understand the barrier.